What's up, STS Nation, and welcome to another episode of Surviving the Survivor, the podcast that promises to bring you the very best guests in true crime, and today is no exception. It is week 3 of the Lori Vallow Daybell trial. Of course, it is the trial of the so-called Doomsday Mom, the wildly twisted story of a seemingly loving mother, a self-proclaimed devout member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, who clearly veered way off of the religion's course and became involved in the deaths of as many as 5 people, including her own children. It is a trial already filled with plenty of drama, and no one knows this better than Lori Hellis, otherwise known as the good Lori, who is here, who was tweeting and being tweeted about for a reason she will disclose momentarily. She is an author and a retired criminal defense attorney. She also moved from Arizona to Boise, Idaho, where I believe it was like 28 degrees today, to help write her book titled Children of Darkness and Light, which is also the name of her YouTube channel. Her blog is the Lori Vallow Story. She puts out a weekly newsletter, and I definitely recommend checking that out. It is very informative, and I read it every week to make sure that I am not missing anything. Back in Utah, Greg Skordas. He was the Democrat candidate for Utah Attorney General. He's practiced law since 1982. He began his career at the Salt Lake Legal Defenders Association. And there he gained a great appreciation for the value of competent legal representation and our Constitution's protections for both victims and the accused. And he's got some things to say about the lawyering going on in Boise. We'll get to that as well. And last but not least, the man who I love to have on because he always brings the energy. That is Dr. Roger Rhodes, a senior therapist at the Pace Center in Greenville, South Carolina, specializing in dysfunctional relationships. And he's worked with inmates inside prisons, so he knows that aspect as well. Dr. Phil wishes he was Dr. Raj, but we've got Dr. Raj. So right off the bat, the Skeeter girl says, I'm looking forward to this one. Thank you, Joel. And let's not forget this. Colby Ryan lost his whole family. So sad. A lot going on right now. A huge thanks to the Advocate, who just became a YouTube member. We appreciate that very much. Gina here. She is guilty as sin, which seems to be the collective thinking when it comes to Lori Vallow's dealings in this crime. Before we get to what happened, Lori, this is an interesting question from Lynn Smith. And STS Nation is obviously one of the most important parts of this entire podcast. Does anyone know how Lori's oldest son, Colby, survived this? Why didn't she want to kill him and or his wife? Great question. Lori?
Because he wasn't in the way.
Right.
He wasn't an impediment to what she was doing. He was an adult. He was married, had a baby. He wasn't in the way. So.
And he was a little harder to manipulate. He was older. I think all that plays into it. Kathy Castro, without wasting a moment, please bring good Lori, a.k.a. Lori Hellis, back. Here she is. Ask and ye shall receive. She's a stellar human being getting railroaded by some unmentionables. Hashtag Lori Daybell trial. So without further ado, Lori, you've become a bit of a celebrity out in Boise. People know who you are, and now they know who you are even more so because you were asked to leave court yesterday, which would have been Tuesday. So in your own words, tell us what happened.
Well, there's way more to this than what happened yesterday. So I have history with this judge. It's sort of interesting. This judge, in very odd, and Greg, I mean, you get this, very odd moves, sealed documents and sealed proceedings left and right. So I thought, why are all these documents sealed? It seems very odd to me. And when I started looking at the statute on what can be sealed and can't, it was very obvious that the judge had not followed the law and that he was sealing documents right and left. And it seemed strange to me. And so I'm a retired lawyer and I know how to write a motion. So I filed motions to unseal the documents. And that started the shitstorm. And so it was really amusing to me today. So this judge and I have this history because I pointed out to him, a woman, how dare I, the temerity, pointed out that he had done something that he'd broken the law, basically, in sealing all these documents. So one thing you need to understand is that everyone involved in this case, all the prosecutors, all of the defense attorneys, the judge, every one of them are members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. In the two counties where these occurrences happened, the population is 96% members of the LDS Church. When you come into Rexburg, the temple looms on the hillside, lit 24 hours a day and glowering down over the population. So it is not a coincidence that this happened when on Friday I was on with Joel and we were talking about the fact that one of the trial strategies that's been a little bit suspect is the fact that they have not addressed the church beliefs at all. And somebody asked me why that wasn't a defense strategy. And my answer was because they're all LDS. And that's just not something that they would do. They would not discuss church beliefs. For one thing, most of what they're talking about there, these folks would believe are sacred, which is code for secret. And so I don't think it's a coincidence that came up. And my comment was they're not really mounting what would be a creditable defense, because in order to do that, they would have to bring to people's attention the deficits in the church. And they weren't going to do that. So I don't think it's a coincidence that then the following day I got thrown out of court. So I went before the judge today, and I have to say I wasn't particularly regretful or repentant about what had happened. And so he told me that I was welcome to stay in the overflow courtroom where the viewing is happening, which is actually way more comfortable than the courtroom. But that I wasn't going to be allowed back in the courtroom again. So, but I thought what was particularly amusing was the first thing he said was, you keep assuming I know who you are, and I don't know who you are, except that one time your phone went off in my courtroom in Fremont County. Totally not acknowledging that I'd filed all these motions, and I appeared in front of him to argue the motions. I appeared.
Did he give you a reason when he said you can be in the overflow room, but you can't be in court? Did he give you a specific reason?
Yeah, because Jim Archibald, who is Lori Vallow's attorney, accused me of having taken a photograph of Lori Vallow in the courtroom. There are no cameras, no recording, no photographs allowed in the courtroom. So I'm old. I have replacement lenses in my eyes, and they're multifocal. And, sometimes I can't focus on my phone in my lap. So according to him, I held my phone up and I took a picture of her. So the court security came and called me out, and they said, somebody says you took a picture. And I handed the guy my unlocked phone and said, no, I didn't. I was writing a tweet. Here's the half-written tweet, which was a "Thanks, Joel, for having me on your show" tweet. And here it is. And I said, I didn't take a picture of her. Here's my phone. Here's my photo gallery. And he looked through it and said, well, I don't see anything. And I said, no, because I didn't take a picture. About that time, the bailiff, who is an older and more assertive court security guy, came up to me and said, I'm seizing your phone as evidence. And I looked at him and said, evidence of what? And I'm thinking to myself, that's interesting. What probable cause do you have to seize my telephone? But I said, for what reason? He said, well, you were caught taking a picture. I said, no, this officer just said I didn't take a picture. And so they sort of conferred for a minute. And the first officer said, you can go back to your seat. So I took my phone and I went back to my seat. When I sat down, somebody said, what was that all about? And I said, hell if I know. Somebody says I took a picture and I didn't. And so then the deputy calls me back out and he says, you can't say things like that. I said, I can't say that you accused me of taking a picture I didn't take. No, you can't say that. I said, okay, fine. I won't say anything else. And I went back and sat down. And then when court started, the judge singled me out and had me removed from the courtroom. After court was already on record, everybody was there. Before we start, I'm going to have you removed from the courtroom. Now, he said, I'm not going to name you, but I'm going to have court security take you out. Well, everybody in the place knows who I am. So I walked out. So I didn't say anything. I just gathered up my things and I went out in the hallway. And the court security guy said, can I continue to watch from the remote room? And the guy said, well, let me find out. So he makes a call. He comes back. He says, yeah, that's okay. So I go down to the remote room. At lunchtime, then the court administrator comes down and very apologetically says, I have to ask you to leave the building.
Oh, my word.
So I got thrown out of the courthouse.
And just to clarify, from what I read and what was tweeted, and I don't know what percent was true or not, but did the bailiff actually look through your phone to see that no photos were taken? Okay.
Yeah.
So okay.
Yeah. Okay. I gave him my unlocked phone and said, here, look, and said, yeah, they went through my phone.
Okay.
So I went to the overflow room and I stayed down there. And then at lunchtime, I was asked to leave the building. So I left. And I was told by the court administrator, if you want to come back tomorrow, you can meet with the judge before court at 8:00. Okay. Well, it's a little complicated because the courthouse opens at 7:30 to let in jurors and people who are coming in early, but they don't start letting the public through the metal detectors till 8:00.
Right.
So the court administrator said to me, be sure and tell them that I said it was okay and you have a meeting. So I went to him and I said, hey, Sandra said I'm supposed to be having this meeting at 8:00. And they said, get in line. So I didn't get through the court metal detectors in time. And so they said, well, we'll see you after court today. So at 3:45, I went back and saw the judge. So here's what was really amusing. First thing he said to me was, I don't know why you think I remember you, because the only thing I remember about you is your phone went off one time in my courtroom in Fremont County. Now, he doesn't remember that I appeared in front of him, called him out for doing things wrong, and made him back down from some of the sealed documents. He doubled down on a lot of them, but I called him out. He doesn't remember me for that. He doesn't remember that I appeared in person in his courtroom before him and argued those motions. But he does remember that my alarm to take my pill went off in his courtroom. Mm-hmm. So then he says to me, I've reviewed the courtroom footage. Now, he didn't offer to allow me to, apparently there is video in the courtroom. Who knew? And so he says, I've reviewed the courtroom footage. And so what I can see is that you lifted your phone like you were going to take a picture. And when the court security called you out, when you came back, you lifted your phone up again and took another picture. And I said, well, obviously I didn't, because the deputy went through my phone. And that that didn't go anywhere. And then he said to me, "You're going to love this. This was your second offense at being disruptive in the courtroom." And I said, "Come again?" And I said, "Can you tell me what that was?" "Well, I'm not going to go into it. If you want to talk to it, you can talk to the court security." So I'm like, okay. So after I was done with him and he told me I could be in the overflow room, I went to the security and said, "Okay, I give up. What did I do on Friday?" So on Friday, I was sitting right behind the defense table and behind the defense witnesses and investigators that are in the front row of this pews. And I was sitting right behind Brandon Hobbs. He is the defense investigator. And he had taken his messenger bag and put it under his seat. So it was kind of right at my feet. And I looked down and I could see something shiny underneath his at his messenger bag. And to me, what it looked like was he had accidentally turned the light on his telephone. And lots of people were putting their phones away so they wouldn't have them out when the court was in session. So I kept looking at it all morning. And when we had a break, I said, "By the way, I think there's a light on down there, and I just don't want you to run your battery down by accidentally leaving your flashlight on." And he said, "Oh, I'll check it." He looked at it and said, "I don't see anything on in here. Maybe it was a reflection off the hardware." I said, "Oh, sorry, just trying to be polite." So that was the first disruption that I had created in the courtroom, was that at a break, I had said to somebody, "Hey, your battery might be running down on your phone." So to me, that just reinforced for me that this is personal, that he absolutely remembers who I am. And he knows there are some sealed documents in this case that he had no business sealing, and that he sealed for the purpose of covering the asses of people who committed misconduct. And I know they're there, and I can't get to them yet, but I'm going to get to them because he can't keep them sealed indefinitely. And so that's what it was all about. It's personal.
Well, Lori, I want to thank you for sharing that. I can tell you I am no therapist, Roger Rhodes is, but I think the reason he remembers you one way, but not from filing the motions, is called selective memory. I'm going to let Roger weigh in on that in a moment. But Greg, you've been around the court system as a lawyer since 1982. Have you seen judges with any kind of personal vendetta striking back at people who are there to observe a trial?
You know, Joel, it's difficult for judges to not have feelings, and they try. They really do try to be balanced and fair, and mostly they are. But there are lawyers that get underneath judges, skin a little bit, and there are litigants who do the same thing. And I've certainly had my issues with judges where you have one thing that goes wrong on a certain day, and the next time you're in front of the judge, or they remember that. And more importantly for me, because you spilled the beans that I'm an old man, been practicing law for 41 years. There are judges who were people I had cases against over the years, people who I had difficult cases against over the years, and that's hard, I think, for some judges to set aside. I mean, most of them do, and they do their job. But if I was a defense attorney and they were a prosecutor and I beat them, and maybe they thought, hey, this guy's I don't like the way he practices. But I do think what happened to Lori, good Lori, was odd. It doesn't make sense to me at all. And really, people haven't been disruptive of this case. The people in the courtroom, and I've been in the overflow room when I've gone, I get too antsy sitting in a courtroom when somebody tells me I can't walk out. I'm going to walk out. And you only get one of those in the courtroom. So I don't understand what happened. There has to be something else behind it, and it's unfortunate because it has nothing to do with the trial. Let's just try the damn case, and people who come and go, let them do their job.
And Greg, what about Lori's contention that she was on our show Friday night, talked about the fact that they're not really discussing LDS because so many people are members of the church. Do you think there's anything to that the judge is just being overly sensitive?
That's a tough one. It really is, Joel. And I've heard the same thing. I really think that the 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 the, the Latter Day Saint community is distancing themselves from Lori Vallow, and really that and I think there's some notion that people might look at her conduct and Chad's conduct and equate that with some teachings of the LDS Church, and that there's sort of this whack idea of good souls and bad souls and black and white and zombies, and it's not. It has nothing to do with it. And so I think really my perception here from Utah, the home of the Latter-day Saints, is that this isn't about religion. At least it's not about that religion. And with every religion, Joel, you get people who sort of go off on the fringe and who do things that they sort of take it in their own direction. And the leaders of those religions are, having a hard time really trying to decide whether to distance themselves from those individuals or embrace them or something in between. So to the extent that this case has nothing to do with the Latter-day Saint faith, I think that's what the leaders of that church would like it to be.
And we're going to dig deeper into what happened at the trial today and get to the trial itself. But Jennifer writes, I'm so happy to see the good Lori's on today. What Judge Boyce did to her was ridiculous and childish, even for him. Followed by Astra, who was tweeting vociferously that Boyce and Archibald were out of order. So rude. By the way, there's a hashtag we have here, Buzz Off Brad. Brad, who hails from, I think, New Zealand or Australia, once gave us 1 star on audio, and STS Nation took exception. So instead of Karens, we have Brads here at STS Nation. And Astra said she's not going to tolerate any Brads, along with a bunch of other STS Nation people. So they are upset. But Greg, back to you before I hop over to Roger. He's a relatively, and this is no shot at him, but he's a relatively inexperienced judge. Some people speculated that he didn't want cameras in the courtroom because he has such little experience behind the bench. Could that be one of the mitigating factors here as to why there's such sensitivity? And by the way, Judge Boyce, you have an open invitation to come on the show. The only good part of this story is maybe he's watching STS. I don't know. But to you, Greg, does his relative inexperience have anything to do with any of this, do you think?
I mean, it certainly could. I mean, just watching him, I think he's tried to be fair. He's tried to do the right thing, but he's real tepid. I mean, he's not. You'd like to see judge that would push this case a little bit further and push the lawyers a little bit further. And we kind of go back and forth on simple things like objections. At some point you're like, Judge, just rule. It doesn't, that evidence doesn't come in. I can tell you that from Salt Lake. But I think he's trying to be fair and trying to have the perception that he's being fair, and I admire that. But with all respect, I think that he's making a 3-week trial into an 8-week trial, and we're just not getting a lot done. I mean, I told you before we started that the jury selection process, it should have never gone as long as it did, and then it just the way it's unfolded. And again, I hate to play armchair quarterback because I've tried cases myself from both sides, prosecution and defense. I've never been a judge. I never will be, but it's just this case should, I think, have had a little bit more of an aggressive stance. And I don't necessarily blame the judge, but I think he could have pushed it a little harder.
Astra writes, no Brads here, just the Good Lori Justice Squad. I love that. The Good Lori Justice Squad. Good Lori, we support you and love you. Dr. Roger Rhodes.
Yes, sir.
What's your take when you hear this story? You're the therapist on the panel. You're the psychology guy. Okay. What's going on with this judge?
Let me help you. Let me jump in here. Lori, it's a great day. Very few people were part of the Salem witch trials in the day. But today you are on the same jury or justice system only it's in this case. And certainly the church is trying to distance, but I guarantee you, if you don't think Lori is trying to reel in the Latter-day Saints onto her club, Lord, man, that there is the real battle. I mean, and one of the things I'm thinking about with football starting, one of the things that they tell college players is playing pro ball is a different game. And if you go in trying to play like a college player on a pro team, that is not going to look pretty. I think that's what the judge is doing. I think he's a college player. He's not a pro player. This is a pro judicial issue, and he's out of his league. And so he's going back to playing, trying to please everybody. And you all know as lawyers, when you try to please everybody, you don't please anybody. So you got everybody biting at each other's ankles in the name of law. Ooh, that's not pretty. That is not pretty at all. Does that help? Does that give you a
that was a great analogy about the Salem witch trial, and Lori, maybe he makes a good point. You're one of the few distinguished people that he dislikes for maybe all the right reasons, because you're doing the right things. But I want to give you the final word on this. So you said you plan to follow up. How do you plan to follow up? And your final thoughts on this part of this saga.
I'll be in the overflow room, and I will be continuing to cover the trial, and I will continue to call it out when I think that's appropriate. I just a couple things I want to respond to. What Greg said about the LDS Church. You're absolutely right that the church writ large, the church with a capital T that is in the big office building in Salt Lake, wants nothing to do with this case. But these are people who are third and fourth and fifth generation LDS members, and this is about the culture of this East Idaho communities where the church, this is literally a place where still, if the bishop's son gets drunk and gets a DUI, they load him in the back of the car and they take him home and they let the church punish him. Okay, that's the mentality. So I don't disagree that the corporate LDS Church wants to distance themselves from this, but these folks are so inculcated with this very isolated and very living in a bubble kind of a culture that it can't help but permeate the trial. And that was my point.
And I just want to add something. In the Bible, it says, pride comes before the fall.
Very true.
That preaches here. Well, a lot of pride going on, a lot of idiocy.
Right.
And
I do want to say that at times I have said, I think Judge Boyce is finally finding his feet a bit in this case, because he was appointed to the bench in late 2019. In 2020, COVID hit and the courthouse was locked down for a year. So he probably hadn't even tried a felony trial until 2021. So, he is fairly inexperienced. And the last thing I wanted to say is I find it really amusing that hashtag Free the Good Lori is trending on Twitter.
I saw, Lori, you were tweeting out, how do celebrities do it, being noticed in public. I think the entire time, my 26 and a half year career in broadcast news, I was spotted maybe 5 times, and there were always someone in the supermarket who thought I was somebody else. But
right.
It's for you might want to, lay low, because now everyone knows that you are the woman that was tossed out. But kudos to you for fighting back. Roger, I wanted to ask you, since my dad was a psychiatrist, my mother's a social worker. What is it about the human condition that draws us to drama when there doesn't necessarily need to be so much drama?
Birds of a feather flock together. Crazy loves crazy. And crazy sends out a vibe, and all the crazies are drawn to it. And then it is a circus of Crazyville. And it's come to a small area. And so you have magnified crazy is what's going on. And, Lori, trying to be civil and have intellect has to be the downside of this plan. Common sense is not the friend of crazy.
Good advice from the good doctor. Kathleen Smith, this is an interesting comment. I'll tell you why, Lori, in a second. Curious to know if Justin Lum, who is with a local Phoenix station that's been covering this from the get-go, and kudos to him for great reporting. So curious to know if Justin Lum is facing scrutiny for sending that interview with Lori Vallow Daybell's cousin to April Raymond. That's not so much what I'm interested in as to the treatment. Have you seen other reporters or quote unquote courtroom observers being treated in a similar manner to you or fearful that they could face retribution?
Not that I have seen, although the people who are in the courtroom are a couple of well-known people from Court TV and Nate Eaton, who is from East Idaho News and is the local boy, and then Justin Lum. Yeah.
And and then we'll move on, but what's the reaction been? By the way, Janet writes, hi from Naples, Florida, which is just across Alligator Alley from me. Judge Boyce does a lot of things out of fear, sealing motions, banning cameras, allowing Pryor's antics. That's John Pryor, Daybell's attorney. Lori Hellis is a woman of integrity. What was the reaction to your peers in the courtroom when this all went down yesterday?
Well, for the most part, people were shocked and couldn't really understand what had happened. Many of them have said, we don't get it. We can't imagine that you would have done that. But they also were distancing themselves a bit because they didn't want to be painted with that paintbrush. So
what we're forgetting here is there was a time when we all were in grade school. Remember how the teacher got the attention of the rest of the class by yelling at one student.
That's right.
This is a great example of that tactic. This is, I'm not going to yell at the other people and get in a fight with them, but you got selected, and I'm sure it was done because you'd embarrassed the boy before. And boy, does a teacher love to jump on a student that has embarrassed that teacher. This is not high thinking. This is low, young thinking action that we're seeing.
And I love the way Dr. Raj breaks things down. Melter Skelter writes, and this is sort of an inside-outside joke because Lori's talked about the pound of coffee. I'm willing to bet, good Lori, a pound of coffee that the judge is making an example of her, even though she did nothing wrong.
Amen.
So Colby Ryan testified yesterday, and it was very emotional, Greg. The question today, basically, for the title is, will Colby Ryan's testimony be the nail in Lori's coffin? Big question. Your answer to that one.
The umpteenth nail, maybe.
One of many.
Yeah, I mean,
maybe the final nail. I don't know.
Yeah, that's her own son, and he called her murderous. He called her out on things. He made clear that he knew what she did, that he was holding her feet to the fire on that. She didn't necessarily argue with him. In fact, she said things that if you look at this case from the side and you say, okay, she did this because she believed these kids were possessed, or they were this or that, and she's telling him things like they're okay, almost like they're in a better place now, they're happy now, I mean, when he's hearing that at the time, Joel, it's kind of weird. But today, when you hear that, knowing what we know, it's creepy, it's spooky, and for her to say that, just makes her cold, just makes her the ice princess. But B, it also gives her the knowledge that the state's trying to impugn on her to have participated in these crimes, that she knew exactly what was going on, which is one step in this. Of course, the state's got to put her more involved than just knowing and sort of aiding and abetting or conspiring, whatever they're going to show. But she's not an innocent, oh my word, I didn't realize what was going on here. When you listen to Colby Ryan testify, I mean, that's her own boy, that's her son. And you're right, the reason why he wasn't in their crosshairs is because he wasn't in the way. I mean, when Chad and Lori wanted to get together, and Chad wanted to hook up with her, the last thing he wants is a couple kids getting in the way, and he wants her to himself. And frankly, they were baggage to her at that point, where Colby's an adult and he's sort of out of the way. He doesn't need to be eliminated.
Yeah, same reason Chad Daybell's adult children
were spared.
We're
Exactly.
unscathed. Yeah. Dawn Shackelford writes, I certainly hope the good Lori is here tonight. You ask and we deliver. And this comment made me think of what Roger just said. Trekkie Girl writes, they sent her, good Lori, to the overflow room today. That reminds me of high school, when you either got sent to the principal's office or you got the pink slip and you got sent to detention. So, again, Judge Boyce, if you were watching, which I know you go home, you take the robe off and you immediately put on STS. You have a open invitation, and you can even come on with the good Lori and debate her right here on STS Nation. Shout out to Marina watching us in the south of Spain, a good friend of the show. Roxanne A, hello STS Nation. Astra writes, good Lori. Dr. Raj, so they played this jailhouse call yesterday, and it starts with the son asking his mom, Lori, if she thought she could keep hiding from him. This is after she was put in jail and the children were discovered. And she says to him, I'm not hiding. Why would you think I'm hiding? And he responds, probably because you murdered my siblings. Maybe you should understand. And she responds, I didn't. I'm sorry you feel that way. You specialize in dysfunctional family relationships. How would you describe this family dynamic?
She's crazy. That's where you have to start. He's trying to reason with an unreasonable woman. He's trying to talk common sense to a woman who couldn't find it if it was in front of her. Okay. She has a script of what she believes, and she's just trying to get everybody on that script, even though it is defied by common sense. He keeps trying to get her to get it. And what is her payoff for getting it? And the payoff is nothing. She's going to jail if she gets common sense. She's got this not well belief strummed up within her head, and she can pass a lie detector test if you ask her about, does she believe the script in which she was following that she made for herself. And that's how a lot of people who break laws can break the law and pass the lie detector test, because in their head they're innocent. So that's what was going on. And what a sad, futile effort by the son, and it really speaks to, thank God he was older and not part of her, a detriment to her script. Wow. That he ought to go, he ought to feel a bullet go right by him. Because I'm guarantee you that anybody that was in a 50-mile radius was a possible selection for death in that game.
Hey, Raj, he he lost both his siblings, and he's about to very likely lose his mother. If he came into your office, how do you counsel someone like that with that kind of devastating loss? I mean, he's the real victim, you know?
Right. And well, first of all, validate that he is a victim, okay? And validate that she is not well, and help him redefine what family is, okay? That, yeah, there's losses. Yeah, everybody's doing this. But sometimes there's a need for transition. There's a time for you to leave what you knew and go find something that's better. And so that's where I would help focus him on is what could a better new family look like? And my thinking is, well, we would start with your spouse and her family, and how well are they? And if they're doing good, I'd say, well, hey, I wonder what would happen if they became your new family, and help him imagine and even sit down and draw out the new family, and take Lori and the dead children, put them on another piece of paper, and have him cut that paper up or burn that paper and say, that's gone, that's history, and give him permission therapeutically to move on. And sometimes people need that. They're stuck, and what keeps them stuck is doubt. And so they need someone, a therapist or a family member or clergy or whatever, for clarity, just clarity, to validate, yeah, she's not well, and she's never going to be well, and you can't get her well. How about let's try something else, and give him an option of a different direction.
He has a huge mountain to climb. What's interesting is I don't think he's lost any faith. I think it's gotten stronger, and I think that'll help him. So that's another interesting part of this. Jenny Meow Meow, please pass along love and support to the good Lori. We appreciate you. Lori Hellis, we love you. Lori, we love you. This is why I love STS Nation. They've got our backs. The good Lori with a ton of heart emojis. Cynthia, welcome. My first time catching STS live. Glad to have you here for the live show every weeknight at 7 p.m., except tomorrow night, 5 p.m. Eastern. We're doing a special on the 1-year anniversary of Charlie Adelson being in jail. He's accused of killing or setting up the hitmen to kill Harvard-trained lawyer Dan Markel, who was married to Charlie Adelson's sister, another very high-profile case. So we are going to be looking at that at 5 p.m. Eastern tomorrow. And we have the state attorney in Florida, the one and only Dave Arenberg, who is a personal friend of Dan Markel, coming on the show tomorrow. So that'll be another good one. Good Lori, to you, here's another passage from that phone call, the jail call between Lori and Colby. To know that they're gone, Colby says, and that you knew. And my phone is being texted by my little sister, who's not even alive, Ryan said, his voice rising. My poor brother, who's the sweetest little kid ever. For what purpose? You tell me this is God's will for my whole family, including my stepfather, to be dead. How impactful was Colby Ryan's testimony yesterday? And I know you had your issue, but I know you followed it. How poignant, how impactful, is it sort of like a linchpin in this case that could be what turns it?
Well, I think it was very impactful. What I found interesting is that phone call starts out where he talks about, you murdered my siblings. And she says, I didn't. I'm sorry you feel that way. But there's a real emphasis on the word I. I didn't. So I think probably it has, that part of it has something to do with her distancing herself from the people who did it. But she also goes on to say, you don't understand. You weren't there. You will never understand you until we're called in front of Jesus. You don't understand. They're happy. It's all okay. And I mean, I think that phone call really goes to the proof that she still believes this. She still firmly believes this.
Yeah.
And I think that seeing Colby sitting there crying while that phone call was being played, I think that was very impactful for the jury. I have a little concern just legally that, I always explain that a circumstantial case is sort of like a chain made out of a lot of links. And I'm not convinced that they've got that link there to link her solidly to the conspiracy and to link her solidly to the people who may have caused the children's death. Now, like I said, we haven't seen the whole trial yet. There's more evidence to come. Today, they introduced a lot of financial information, which seems to maybe make those links get closer together. But
and we'll get to the financial stuff. But Greg, I'm curious to get your take on that, because that's sort of been the $64,000 mystery question. Sure, all these dead bodies have piled up, and sure, Lori's been around all these people, and sure, her brother was a weird guy, and sure, their relationship was weird. But to Lori's point, is there enough, in your opinion, right now to tie her to this conspiracy and tie her to the actual murders for a conviction?
I mean, the short answer is no, because we're not done with the trial. The state's still putting on its case, but they're building a case. And we talk about this in the prosecutor school, that, a trial is like a puzzle, and you put it together and everybody's just a piece of the puzzle. And the jury's seen about a third of this puzzle, and you can't get a picture from a third of a puzzle. And so give them some time, but they're setting this up quite well, I think. And maybe they don't have that witness who's going to come in and say Lori did this or Lori told me that. Maybe if they did have such a person, we would have had them testify by now. What the state's done a good job with, Joel, is nobody likes Lori. I mean, nobody likes this woman. She is a bad person, and whether she conspired or jumped in or aided and abetted, her kids are dead, and that's about as bad as it gets from a mommy perspective. I mean, so we all want to punish her. The jury wants to see her suffer. They want her to face the consequences of what happened here, but they still want that evidence that shows that she was part of that decision to remove those kids. And I think the state's going to do that, whether it's just a ton of circumstantial, just so many links of the chain that we can't even get around it, where there's some bombshell that we haven't seen yet. But the state's doing a good job of building this mountain against Lori that may be just insurmountable for her to overcome.
Yeah, it seems like there's so much smoke around her. It's not a fire, it's a blaze. And maybe the jury just sees that, and we'll put that together. Lori, I know we keep saying we're going to put this behind us, but some questions keep coming up. Michelle says, is that why they don't want her in court? Because she's writing a book. Do you feel like the book has something substantial to do with you being removed, and that maybe you'll be critical in that book of the judge or the process? And then let us not forget, Susan writes, Archibald doesn't want good Lori there. He is the defense counsel, Jim Archibald, and he was the one that flagged, I believe, the judge initially, saying, hey, look over here. She's got her cell phone up. He's kind of like the bully in school, to use Dr. Raj's analogy, or the goody two-shoes in school, who was calling out.
You just love that character.
Calling out the bad Lori. But I'm curious, Lori, do you think it's the book, and is Jim Archibald really the one here who may have a stronger issue even with you?
I don't know. I honestly don't know what their motivation is. I can say I have history with this judge, and I can see where he would be. He would not want me in his courtroom, and I can see where that would happen. So I honestly don't know.
Time will tell, and we'll find out.
Yeah.
And of course, you'll keep us on top of this.
Sure.
So to one of Greg's big criticisms is that this trial is dragging on. And one of the things we saw in the Alec Murdaugh trial with Judge Clifton Newman, he kept things moving along. He was no Judge Lance Ito at all. However, and forgive me because we've had so many guests in the last couple of days, but someone came on in the last day or two and said that they believe this trial is actually moving at a much faster clip than the 8 weeks and believes it could be over in the next 2 weeks. Lori, is that feasible from what you're seeing?
Yeah, I think I said that.
Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
Well, then it was you, Lori. And so why do you think it's moving at a faster clip now?
Well, for one thing, the defense isn't putting on a defense of any kind. So there are a lot of, I don't have any questions for this witness, or a lot of perfunctory defense questions, and they move on. I think the judge even said today, things are moving faster than we expected. And so, I think it's going to wrap up pretty quickly.
Old Lady Snoop says, love Dr. Roger, love Greg with the good hair. You're challenging our other criminal defense attorney, Tim Jansen. This is going to be a great show. Love the good Lori. Hello from freezing Vancouver, Washington. What's going on in this country? In Miami, it's a chilly 84, 85 today, but I'm dealing with it fairly well today. Don't like when it gets below 84. Sorry, everyone.
Climate change.
Thank you, Old Lady Snoop. I graduated from high school in Vancouver, Washington.
There we go.
Oh, there you go. Connections.
I'm a home girl.
There's pride there.
So, Greg, would you be relieved if this is in fact over? Because as the good Lori says, there's really no defense being put up. Would you be relieved to know that it could be over in as little as 2 weeks?
Yes, and maybe the defense will too, Joel, because I think the defense is you haven't got a case. There's reasonable doubt. It's what we've actually been talking about this evening on the show. Where's that linchpin? Where's that piece that puts the jury over the top? So the defense may be doing the right thing here by not doing much or saying much. I mean, their opening remarks, I thought, what are they? I didn't hear anything like, and except at the end he said there's reasonable doubt, and I thought, okay, that's the defense. They didn't talk about a single witness they intend to call. They didn't mention whether or not their client may be testifying, and they don't have to. But the jury sometimes wants to hear that. You know, when you say as a defense attorney, I'm going to put my client on the stand, and she's going to tell you that she didn't do it. She's going to tell you this. And the jury wants to hear that. So maybe the defense is sitting back going, you know, we've read everything. We know everything about this case. And they're not going to be able to put Lori in the driver's seat to the unanimous satisfaction of 12 jurors and beyond a reasonable doubt that she committed any of these crimes, a murder, let alone a conspiracy to commit murder. And so the defense may be, we don't need to put on a defense because the state doesn't have it.
I think one of the most, maybe closest to a smoking gun, it was the testimony from Zulema Pastanis, who said that the night that Tammy Daybell was shot at, somebody took a shot at Tammy just the same way they did at Brandon Boudreaux. And then 10 days later, she died in her sleep. But initially, the night that somebody took a shot at her, Lori was in Arizona holding a casting with her. I don't know. Sometimes I feel like they should be called a coven, but this group of women.
Correct.
And they were holding a casting to cast the evil spirit out of Tammy Daybell. And then, as she always did, Lori had to get on the phone and call Chad to find out whether their work had worked. And Chad Zulema overheard this conversation in which she characterized Lori as very, very scary, angry, and ranting about the fact that he couldn't do anything right, and he needed to be supervised. He couldn't do anything right because Alex Cox had failed to shoot Tammy Daybell. So I think that was the closest we get to the smoking gun connection. of her being involved in the conspiracy.
Interesting take there. WD-40, which I could use for my back and knee right now. Trying to follow this case is confusing between disjointed releases, poor quality of audio, no scheduled release times, and having to listen to commercials on rebroadcast, disgraceful treatment of the public, Greg. Curious what you think of that comment, coupled with this comment from Laura Minoto, if I'm saying that right. Could Judge Boyce have just issued a gag order rather than sealing everything? Wouldn't that have accomplished what he wanted?
You know, I'll defer to the judge a little bit here, but this is not New York City. This is not Denver. This is not Los Angeles. And even though the trial was moved from a really small jurisdiction to the big city of Boise, it's still going to be hard after 4 weeks or 6 weeks or whatever this trial is for this jury to remain sterilized from the outside influences. And so just keeping a lid on the media that comes out of this every day, no cameras in the courtroom, really no audio unless you're sitting in one of the rooms, or you want to wait a couple of days. So the judge is doing everything he can to preserve the integrity of this trial, even to the extent of excluding the media in a case that the media has every right to be present at and to be part of. And it seems now that he's even a little bit nervous about somebody who would dare to write a book about this, because, the media reports about what happens every day, but a book's going to go deeper and going to go into the personalities of the people at the trial. And maybe that's making some people nervous too. And that's my take on why the good Lori got tossed, is because she's got to get into the personalities of this case.
100%. Marina, again, who's watching from the south of Spain. I thought the judge wasn't LDS, so there's some confusion here, followed by Jennifer. The judge is LDS. Lori, just clarify this for us.
He is. As far as I know, he is. I have been told that he is not regularly attending, and that probably isn't all that unusual for a judge who doesn't want to socialize with the people who might come before him. But to the best of my knowledge, he is a member of the LDS Church.
And I just wanted to respond to this. This is important, Lori. Oh, Lori, I love you. Please don't blame the church on how you're being treated in the courtroom. You've been so fair and respectful this whole case. It is very important. I had people write to me, and I literally changed the introduction, and I now refer to Lori Vallow as a self-proclaimed LDS church member. Right. There is a massive distinction between LDS and obviously what Lori Vallow is thinking. It's a completely bastardized, twisted, demented version of the religion. But Lori, I just wanted to give you a chance to respond, and then have Dr. Roger Rhodes weigh in as well.
I absolutely agree with this comment. I have tried really hard to separate the two, the church and the church's teachings, which I know a lot of really wonderful people who are members of the church, and they are great neighbors and they are kind people. And that really doesn't have anything to do with this. And I absolutely do not blame the church on how I'm being treated in the courtroom. But when you are critical of the players, saying they're pulling their punches or they're not giving an adequate defense, because that would mean that they personally would have to come up against their own beliefs, that's a different piece. This really has nothing to do with the church as an institution, has everything to do with the culture that these people exist in.
And Roger, to you, I just want you, by the way, Kathleen Barrett writes, this should make an interesting chapter in Good Lori's book. Dr. Raj, can you discern between Lori Vallow's twisted, demented view of this, bastardized religion, for lack of a better way to describe it, from the actual religion, which people follow and gives them meaning and structure and a belief system. How important is it to distinguish between a legitimate religion and what Lori was dealing in?
I think that there's a distinction between this and the fact that it's one, we're talking about a cult and a bunch of nutty people that were easily influenced, a bunch of sheep, and the LDS structured religion. You know, they're just two totally different groups, but those groups exist everywhere. The Baptists have cults. The Catholics have cults. Everybody's got cults. You know, the element of religion attracts cult-like people. And part of the establishment is to keep them out of the building, you know? And so they don't want to associate, but I love the idea of the thought of culture, the influence of culture. And that is incredibly valuable here. Yes, it's not the church. It's not the structured, church and its leaders. It's the culture that has been raised up before this ever happened, that allowed the cult to be created and survive and give it power.
Jennifer writes, "Hey, Judge Boyce, the whole world's watching." Rich Buddy writes, "There's no free speech, even in the parking lot of the court building," followed by Leah Baker. "I wrote him about not allowing cameras." Skeeter Girl says, "This is nuts." Speaking of nuts, Dr. Raj, there's something that comes up on the show, and I don't think I've asked you. Lori and her brother, who is tied to almost every one of these murders, had a very dysfunctional relationship, to use your terminology. You deal in dysfunction. I asked my own mother, who's a therapist, and she described it as a incestuous relationship. And my mother gave the caveat, maybe they weren't having sex, but it was very incestuous. How would you describe this bizarre relationship between Lori Vallow and her brother, who was kind of her henchman?
In every healthy relationship, there must be boundaries. If there are no boundaries and you're blood related, that's incest. It's not about sex. That is just something added on. Oh, you have sex, that's incest, that's what it is. But no, there's emotional incest, and it comes from an environment that is boundaryless. And that's what you had in that cult. That's what you had in that family. You know, that's also what you had with reality. You know, they were off the reservation. This is not the, we're the Cleavers. Come on, no. Cleavers had boundaries, man. These people are sick. And no, they didn't have boundaries, and they were clearly emotionally incestuous.
I told you that Dr. Phil has got nothing on Dr. Raj's. There's no way Dr. Phil's coming up with this stuff on the fly the way Dr. Raj does. So I'm setting up a challenge between, I'll have both of them on, and I'll have STS Nation weigh in. So Greg, to you, in opening statements, the prosecution talked about power, money, sex. We've seen those elements. The financials came into it pretty heavily today. We find out the kids were receiving about, and that's JJ and Tylee, who ended up dead, were receiving about $3,800 a month combined from Social Security benefits. And Lori herself was receiving about $1,900 a month in benefits after Charles Vallow's death, her fourth husband. The agency stopped all the payments in January 2020 because the kids were missing, he said. And we find out a lot of information about how those funds ended up being funneled into Lori's private bank accounts. I'm wondering, this isn't the stuff that necessarily is quote unquote sexy. But but it does speak to financial motive. How important is this, and how much impact will this have on a jury of Lori's peers?
So you said the exact right word, Joel, and that is motive. And I think the state's trying to establish the motive here. And power, sex, and money are the keys to the motive here. And that's one of the pieces, this money thing. If the state can show, and I think they can easily show, that there were some checks to these kids that went to Lori's benefit, even after she knew they were dead, that ties the money in pretty tightly. I mean, if she's benefiting from them during the time they're alive and taking advantage of them, that's bad. But if it continues even one day after they've passed, especially where her own son is setting her up to the point where she knew they were gone, he confronts her and confronts her with knowledge that they were gone, and she knew that, and she doesn't deny it. She just says they're in a better place, so to speak. But that gives us some pretty good financial motive to this, and that's, like I say, that's a third of the state's sort of motive here. And motive is, we always tell juries, motive's not an element of a crime. You don't have to prove it. That's not what a case is about. But jurors want to know the motive. They want to know why this happened. They want to know why a mother would be involved, even to the weirdest extent with the death of her own kids, even the most tangential part of that. And if money's part of it and she's benefiting, bingo, they've got that. They've got the state can check that box off.
A guy named Mike Douglas with 2 S's at the end, who's an FBI forensic accountant. He took the stand today. And by the way, some people, reporters in the courtroom, reported that the jurors looked a little bored and some were yawning, which sometimes happens when you're pulling out bank receipts. So, that's something to take note of. But interestingly enough, Tammy Daybell has a brother named Mike Douglas, like the talk show host, but neither related to her. But Lori, to you, at 10:09 a.m., Mike Douglas is testifying, and he says, on August 14th, Lori wrote on her apartment application that she was receiving $5,740 a month from Social Security funds. 2 days later, Tylee's Social Security benefits were changed to go to Lori's bank account rather than Tylee's, and her joint bank account was opened with her mother. Again, what kind of impact is it knowing that Lori was taking, and albeit they were children, minors, but that she was taking essentially their money and not putting it into a college fund or a savings account, but was spending it freely? What does that tell you?
Well, Social Security benefits are for the support of minor children. So I don't think that it's all that unusual that a mother is receiving those benefits and is using them for the support of the children. I think that's what Social Security sort of anticipates will happen. But more troubling is the fact that Tylee had also, and this was very interesting, the way that the prosecution got this information in through the financials, because there's another dead husband, and they were able to get that information in through the financials because Tylee inherited about $65,000 when her father, Joseph Ryan, died. And nobody's made any suggestion that Lori was responsible for that. But the prosecution was able to get that little gem in, that there's yet another dead husband out there. And I think that's going to be in the back of the jurors' minds. But Tylee did inherit insurance money from her father. So they didn't really get into that very deeply. But the bottom line is Lori took that money too. So when she moved all of Tylee's account into her own account, whatever was in there, including the proceeds from the insurance, all went into Lori's account. And sadly, it was only a few days later, maybe a week later that Tylee was the last proof of life for Tylee.
And speaking of Tylee, to you, Dr. Raj,
Yeah.
Detective Chuck Kunsadis, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, he's with the Chandler, Arizona Police Department and was in to testify. And he said they were looking at Lori's accounts. And just a day or so after they believe that Tylee was killed in Rexburg, Idaho, she gets on the phone, I believe, or writes to him in an email to her accountant that Charles Vallow died and she wanted information about how to forward tax returns to her new address. She's asking this question a day after her own daughter was murdered. Tylee was killed September 8th or 9th. It's a day before that. So the email was sent, quote unquote, hours after we believe Tylee was buried in the backyard. What does this say about the mother of this child worried about money and not seemingly about her child just hours, if not a day, after she was reportedly buried in the cold backyard there in Rexburg?
It doesn't say she's crazy. It screams she's crazy. Okay. And you ask about financials, and every time I think about Al Capone, didn't think financials were a big deal. And he went to prison for taxes, not for killing people. It was a money issue that got that man in prison. So money's a big deal. And I love the idea that we've not seen the big picture. I totally agree with that. I think this is about putting a puzzle together. And the hope is that the people in charge are able to put a viable puzzle together in a CSI environment. That's what we're battling. You know, they're looking for a gun. They're looking for a video of her killing those kids. And that, that doesn't happen. But can they build a case that points the finger and exposes her illegal activities? I think that's what they're doing. And I think that's common sense doing that. It's a good move.
Patty Barnett writes, the average LDS, Latter-day Saints, aren't like this. It's those in charge who are drunk in their power, followed by Roxanne, who writes, what is wrong with saying there are fanatics in every religion? And this is a great example. It is a free country, last I checked, with the First Amendment. You can say whatever you want. You should try to be responsible. And again, the LDS is a very valid religion. People follow it. They have their faith built in it, and it is not what Lori Vallow was involved in. Greg, back to you, and we'll go a few more minutes because I think this is fascinating. But there's also documentation between Chad Daybell and the Hawaiian realtor when they were shopping for a home. And he writes to this realtor, we are interested in seeing this property. Would the owners of the property be interested in leasing this to a clean couple with no pets or children? Please let us know. Thank you. You're potentially a mother, and you're sitting on this jury. We don't know if there is a mother, but there are 8 women, so the chances are decent. How does this factor in? I mean, when you hear this?
Oh, I think it's gut-wrenching. I mean, I think that it's the same thing that Lori was doing. And these two were setting themselves up as this fun couple traveling around. They had money. They had resources. They were cute. They were in Hawaii. They were traveling in Arizona. They're in Idaho. And these kids were not just a burden to them. They were a problem. They were just so much in the way. And yeah, cute couple with no pets and kids. Let's rent them a space, because that's what they wanted to be. That was the image they wanted to be. And you know what I think is really telling from what we're hearing here is that we all went into this trial thinking that Chad was this lunatic, that he was this crazed sort of religious fanatic, and Lori bought into it. But what the state's doing is showing that she had some bizarre thoughts of her own, that she was out there on her own. And so we're talking about Chad and things that he's doing, talking about things that Lori did at the same time. I mean, these two they should have never met. I mean, these two should have never gotten
Well, wait a minute. As a therapist, I'm
together.
saying they couldn't help but have met.
No, I know.
Birds of a feather flock together, man. Nutty seeks out nutty.
Yeah.
I've never seen anything like it.
Yeah, and that's what happened here. And I don't think Lori's not going to get anywhere in this case saying I drank Chad's Kool-Aid. She was making it herself.
Well, and I don't think Chad's going to get any traction out of saying he was drinking the blonde bombshells Kool-Aid either. Right. I always say this was kind of a perfect storm. I mean, I think two people who really are potentially psychopaths got together and their crazies meshed, and it really was a perfect storm.
Yes.
Lori, what about everyone? And then Dr. Raj, I'd like your take on this. Everyone says that Chad Daybell has to be, we know the most interesting man alive from Dos Equis. He's the opposite. They say he's the least interesting guy alive, just a boring, drab guy. How do you think he wielded this power over Lori, or was it the other way around? And then Doc Raj, I'd like your take on that.
I think the most telling thing is when Lori has been married 5 times. The last 2 of her husbands converted to the LDS faith for her. But I think the most telling comment was when she told Melanie Gibb, I finally found my spiritual equal. And to me, that was the attraction to Chad. He was a Pillsbury doughboy with a crew cut and a short sleeved white shirt and a tie. I mean, he was an LDS dad. But what's also interesting is if you see pictures side by side of him before he met Lori and then in Hawaii with Lori, he's dropped 40 or 50 pounds. He's got a new haircut. He's tanned. He's looking like that cool guy. So I think they kind of played into one another. But I think that she found him desirable because she found her spiritual equal.
And Roger, to you, we all remember Waco. The documentary is on Netflix right now. As much as you might not want to believe it, a guy like David Koresh, he was engaging. He was persuasive. Guys like Marshall Applewhite from Heaven's Gate, persuasive, engaging. But this Chad Daybell guy is kind of just like a drip drab guy. Why do you think he had so much influence over her?
Well, if you really had a personality and a drive, you actually wouldn't attract sick people. You would attract other healthy people. But if you're a clean, a blank slate, then and had an open ear, people would be automatically drawn to you. See, when you look at cults, the people that run the cult or the leaders of the cults are not heavily charismatic people. They tend to be very drab people because they want people to feel I'm just like you. And because I'm just like you, how about us all go do this? It's kind of like joining the club. And so that is the nature of the beast. And one thing I want to share with you that you might not know, I have a friend that he worked for a newspaper in Waco and interviewed Koresh before that. And he said, uneventful. He was just a regular guy who was a little weird about religion. But he said, would you have picked him out in a lineup? And my friend said, never. He was so much in Texas, a regular guy. And there then said, that's what cult people are attracted to. It's the closer you get to blank slate, the more followers you're apt to pull into. Applewhite, you wouldn't have picked him out in the crowd. Very few are really these, Brad Pitt, George Clooney kind of guys. That's what they ought to be. Well, that's hooey. Those people, become movie stars. They don't become cult leaders. But cult leaders are blank slates. He was a great candidate. And I love the idea that they found each other. I bet they saw each other from across the room and fireworks hit. Before they ever talked, before they ever communicated an idea, I believe their vibe, their sick vibe connected. And
those are some wacky fireworks going off there.
Oh, yeah. And you see the same thing in addiction. I mean, if you get a codependent in a room and you get an addict in a room and you get 40 other people in the room, those two people will find each other.
Right.
It is the weirdest. It's kind of supernatural, but weird attracts weird. Dysfunction attracts dysfunction. And so if I want to run a cult and I need quote unquote followers, and think of Manson. Manson was a tiny little man. Mm. I mean, you wouldn't have picked him out, and a lifetime in prison, but he had, many people killing for him. That's nuts.
And he didn't do the actual killing. He got people to do it for him.
Hey,
Greg, to you, just from a legal standpoint, there were a bunch of Chandler, Arizona witnesses on the stand today, and every time they were put on the stand and sworn in, Jim Archibald immediately objected, saying this has nothing to do with the state of Arizona. From a legal perspective, can you explain why these witnesses are able to testify in Boise about stuff that happened in Chandler, but I assume because it's relevant to this case? But can you just elaborate on that?
Every time you ask a question, your last word is my lead in. So relevance, that's exactly what it is here. You kill me, Joel. But that's what you need to establish. And that's what the prosecution has convinced the judge, that in terms of the Idaho murder, in terms of the Idaho case, the Arizona people have some relevant information. Now, they may be involved with that situation down there, and maybe that particular what the crimes that they're being that they were indicted on in Arizona are going to have their own trials or their own juries, their own whatever. But information that is tied the murders together, tied the personalities together, tied the people together, is somehow relevant, and the judge has believed and has found that it's relevant enough that he's going to allow those witnesses to testify, and he has. The defense has no choice but to make their record and to object for appellate issues, or for even maybe just to get the jury sort of thinking, hey, wait a minute, this isn't really related to what we're doing. These witnesses are sort of a fly in the ointment, and they're red herrings, so to speak. But the judges just said no, they have information that's relevant to the prosecution in this case. It's pertinent to what the state is trying to put on, and we're going to let the jury hear from them.
And we wind up
in the puzzles. What's going on? They're putting together a puzzle, and the Arizona people have a couple of pieces that they want to put in to make the picture.
100%.
Genius move.
We wind up at the end where we began. Ariska has a question. Good Lori, do you know why the judge said 30 plus documents you asked for were already public? Surely that can't be true. Followed by this. Will you get in trouble, good Lori, for what you said tonight on the show? They want to know.
So Ariska, the answer to Ariska's question is much longer and gets us off on a tangent. So I'm happy to answer that question, but probably better for me to answer it directly with her, and I will. I don't know whether I'll get in trouble for what I said tonight on the show. I don't know how much more I could get in trouble than being banished from the courtroom. So I don't know that there's much more they can do. Difficult research. Hi, Kresha. Kresha is a family member. She is Charles Vallow's niece, Kaywood Cox's daughter. And the The church is the reason they met in the first place. Google second anointing. It'll blow your hair back. She's absolutely right. So
by the way, Kresh, I would love for you to reach out, Surviving the Survivor at Gmail or through Lori. I'd love to get you on here to get your perspective, but I'm glad you're here, happy that you're here, and you're always welcome. Go ahead, Lori.
I think it's important to recognize that while the beliefs that Lori and Chad espoused were cult-like and aberrant to the mainstream church, they did in many cases have their roots in the church. And if not in current doctrine, in the past history of the church. And what often happens is that they, you got it, I'm in red tomorrow.
And a witch hat.
What often happens with the church, because it's a really young church compared to a lot of religions, is that as their doctrine changes and develops, groups split off because they don't agree with the changes. And so we now have 75 groups that in some way identify with the teachings of Joseph Smith. The mainstream LDS church that claims to have about 17 million members is the largest of those. But each time that there is a revision in church doctrine, and probably polygamy is the most obvious thing, some people split off from the church because they don't agree with that change, and they're clinging to the historical teachings of the church that go back to Joseph Smith. So although I agree completely that we're talking about not the monolithic church as an organization, we are talking about things that have been rooted in LDS history.
You're talking about culture, not religion,
right.
Structured religion.
Right.
There's the division. Okay, they may have met at church, but they did not grow within the structure of the church. They grew in the culture of the church. Is what happened.
Right.
And this is a tough show to wrap because there's so many good questions. Greg Owl writes, do you think that Judge Boyce's avoidance of the LDS factors will cause a mistrial? Is there any way could be grounds for some sort of mistrial in this case?
No. I mean, I think the judge had no choice but to. This isn't a Latter-day Saint crime. It has nothing to do with the church, except that they met in connection with it. And I think that the judge and the prosecution and even the defense, whether they're members or not, have been smart to stay away from that, because I don't think that plays into this case at all. I really don't.
And I'm glad to hear you say that, and it makes me feel better knowing that, because again, I consider LDS. I know I have friends who are LDS, a very valid religion. It gives people a lot of purpose and meaning. And again, what Lori Vallow Daybell and Chad were dealing in was not LDS. His name is Dr. Roger Rhodes. He makes Dr. Phil look like the Judge Boyce of judges, if that makes any sense, the kindergartner. He is a senior therapist at the Pace Center in Greenville, South Carolina, specializing in dysfunctional relationships. Perfect for this. And he's worked with inmates inside prisons. Perfect for what could be Lori Vallow's future. Dr. Raj, why is there so much crazy in this world? Why can't we just be a little bit more normal?
Lack of structure. When you let structure go, it causes crazy to thrive. And that's what we've seen. You know, I'm not saying that I'm going to say America's always been crazy. Americans have always been crazy, but it was harder to see when it was structured. But the structure has melted away, and boy, we're getting the magna cum laude of nutty out there now. I mean, buddy, and we're giving them a platform. You get on TV, you get a book, you get all this. Wow, that, better to burn out than to fade away, said Neil Young. That's what's going on. No structure. And that's the battle in America: structure versus no structure. And so
now
people pick one or the other.
And today I saw a woman walk into a telephone pole while looking at her cell phone. So you can throw in cell phones to add to the insanity of already insane world.
Hey.
People are paying no attention. His name is Greg Skordas, and if you live in Utah and you did not vote for him for Attorney General, that's your fault, because now you're stuck with whoever the Attorney General is in that state. Greg has practiced law since '82. The guy looks younger than me, and he's an avid cyclist, and he may have even cycled back from Boise to Salt Lake. I have no idea, but he's a phenomenal lawyer. We appreciate you coming on, Greg. There's a question here that goes right to what you're just saying. And Vroom is a friend of the show. Aren't beliefs irrelevant at some point? Even assuming tenants were sincerely held, the issue is whether defendant conspired to murder 4 innocent people. Who cares what she believes? Thanks. And that's a great point. No matter what she did believe, she is an accused killer, and she took the lives of people according to her trial right now and the state that she shouldn't have. But Greg, your final thoughts?
I'm glad that was posted. I really am, because that's exactly right. Those beliefs are not relevant to the case. They're not. And insanity is not even on the table. Mental illness doesn't factor into a lot of what we're talking about, or bizarre beliefs. What's important is whether or not she was part of a conspiracy or part of an actual homicide involving these kids and a third person. I mean, it's did she do it or didn't she? And what she believed or what was going through her head at the time isn't relevant, and may even be a distraction to the jury in some respects.
Lori Hellis, I want to personally thank you for coming on and sharing your story here on Surviving the Survivor. We really appreciate it, and I know it takes guts to come out, especially now that people really know who you are and are coming up to you, and you don't necessarily know who they are. So you have a voice that matters, and we appreciate you using that voice on our show to explain what unfolded over the last couple of days. Of course, Lori, she moved from Arizona to Boise, Idaho to help write her book titled Children of Darkness and Light, which is also the name of her YouTube channel. So check out her YouTube channel. The blog is the Lori Vallow Story. Sarah Ann writes, I just have to say, I love Lori Hellis. She is a class act, followed by Sally, who says, revenge and retribution from the judge, from a professional. So are you surprised how much these people have your back, Lori, and your final thoughts?
Well, I'm blown away by how many of these folks have reached out to me and have been really supportive. I love my online community. I think that they're smart and they're really on top of this case, and they make me think about it a lot. And so I'm really appreciative that they've all been so supportive. Absolutely. And a little surprised. Yeah.
A final comment here. Ketchup is a good friend of the show. Much love to Colby Ryan for keeping a strong head on his shoulders. His mom took his family from him, and that's got to be a ton of pain to carry every day. And I'm glad she said that, because we do get lost in these true crime dramas, forget that real people are involved. And Colby Ryan's going to need a guy like Dr. Raj, and there's no shame in saying that. He's gone through tremendous trauma, and we wish him the very best. A quick programming note. Once again, tomorrow we are 5 p.m. Eastern time. We've got the state attorney out of Palm Beach County, who happens to be a Democrat named Dave Arenberg, who happens to brawl with a guy named Donald Trump. And he's a close personal friend of Dan Markel. And it is the 1-year anniversary that Charlie Adelson, who's accused of putting a hit out on Dan Markel, Dave Arenberg will be here along with Carl Steinbeck, along with John Singer and Judy Tsang of Asian American Legal Focus. Diane O'Brien writes, in memory of my father today, Diane, happy to see that. Happy to think that you are thinking of your father. No better thing to do than express that you miss him and that you are thinking of him. And we are sorry for your loss there. And then Friday, 12:30 Eastern, Great Scott, it's your True Crime Phil with Detective Phil Waters. And a huge thanks to STS Nation and a huge thanks to our best guests, Greg Skordas. If I had to pay him his billable hours, I'd be in debt for the next 10 years. So we thank him. Dr. Raj, thank you. Lori Hellis, thank you. Love you, America. Love you, Utah. Love you, South Carolina. Love you, Boise.